My guest today, Pierre Poilievre, former minister, 6-time member of Parliament, and conservative shadow minister for Ministry of Finance. Pierre has served 16 amazing years as MP and is a free market activist. He also believes the government should take part in an environment where business owners can succeed in Canada while eliminating red tape. 20 years ago, Pierre notably wrote a paper entitled "Politics Should Not Be a Lifelong Career." We'll have to ask you about that, Pierre. Pierre also advocates for the employment of people with disabilities, personal freedom, and limiting government. Pierre, I really appreciate you coming on to the show today. You've come all the way out here from Eastern Canada, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Thank you for being here today.
Very pleased.
So, Pierre, let's jump right into this. Let's start with Erin O'Toole. He's recently become the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Give us your thoughts.
Son of an auto worker, veteran, working class family, built a great successful career in business, and has thrice been elected in the Greater Toronto area. That is a great starting point for the leader of the Conservative Party. He stands for workers. He wants to bring jobs back to Canada that have been scared away by excessive government, high taxes and red tape, and hostile socialistic policies. He'd like to reverse all those policies to bring our jobs back to this country so we make stuff here again, become self-sufficient, stand on our own feet. And I think that's the agenda Canada needs as we rebuild our economy.
There were a lot of people before even the likes of Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole announced their run for leadership. A lot of people were calling for you to become the leader of the Conservative Party. And how come you didn't choose to go down that path? I mean, you would have been, in my view, a really good candidate.
Thank you for saying that. Well, you know, I talked it over with my family. We weren't ready for that kind of a commitment. It's a massive, all-encompassing commitment, and we hadn't planned for it or prepared for it. And so when the opening suddenly came, it was a sudden opening. Remember, Andrew Scheer was expected to stay on after the election. Until he decided to bow out. We just weren't in a state of readiness to do that kind of a job. And Aaron, Peter, and others were, and all the credit goes to them for that.
Okay. I wanted to spend a minute talking about yourself for the listeners on our show who might not be familiar with yourself. And just for those who are listening, we're also going to spend time talking about basically just two subjects here. It's transparency in government, and our country's finances. But before we do that, let's talk a bit about yourself. Now, one of the things also that kind of parlays with Erin O'Toole, I know one of the big discussion points around the candidates that were running is the fact that none of them were very strong in French. And of course, you kind of have to win majority of Quebec to win an election. Your French is impeccable. I'm assuming you grew up speaking French. I don't know. Seems like a French last name.
Well, my dad is a French Canadian from Saskatchewan, and I grew up in Calgary. Okay. So it was hard to maintain our French. He did speak to my brother and I when we were toddlers, and it was probably the first language to which he spoke to us. I kind of lost it, though, during my adolescence because there just wasn't a lot of French speaking around Calgary, as you know.
Yeah.
But when I got to university, I made sure to load up on French classes in my undergrad at U of C, and then worked to recapture my French heritage when I became a member of Parliament and studied deeply the language, and I love the language. It's a beautiful language, and that's how I've become fluently bilingual. I had the advantage of a French Canadian father, but it did take some catch up in my later adolescence and early adulthood.
Okay. Well, before we jump to transparency in government finances, tell us about how did you get this to kind of close the gap here? You went from having a job in Ottawa to now you're an MP for Carleton. This is your third term, I believe.
Sixth
term. Sorry,
yes.
Sixth term, apologize.
04, 06, 08, 11, 15, and 19, all elections.
Wow.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, you wrote a paper about politics should not be a lifelong career.
That's right. Well, I'm planning to live to be 130. So, people are living longer every single day. In Canada, actually, people live 40 days longer per year. So I mean, I have to admit, I wrote that essay when I was a teenager. And I still think there's a lot of truth to it, but I've always felt the urge to continue fighting for what I believe in and I concluded that Parliament was the best place in which to do that. So that's why I keep running.
Yeah. And you keep winning.
I have been winning. Yeah, so far I've been winning, but knock on wood, I don't want to get cocky about it because pride precedes the fall, as the good book says.
Yeah. So I have in front of me here an envelope from the Government of Canada.
Uh-oh.
This is from Global Affairs, and this is one of many FOIs that I run. So for those listeners that are not familiar, it's a Freedom of Information request. Yep. We have the right as Canadian citizens to ask the government for information. And so I got this CD. Now, there is a tweet from Justin Trudeau. I don't know if we have it on there, but he makes reference to the fact that, let's see here. Canadians deserve the most transparent and open government in the world. Retweet if you agree. So this is how I get freedom of information. I'll give you some anecdotal stats. We have probably about 10 FOIs in play right now. Over half of them have been extended.
Yeah.
We rarely get what we look for when we ask for it, and we're very specific. It's not like we're vague, so we know what we're looking for.
Yeah.
It's largely around something related to the government's finances, and an incredible amount of redactions. So, and then anecdotally, the ATIP request was shut down through COVID. So can you give me some of your initial thoughts on, first of all, I got a CD player to actually read this.
Right. This was actually cutting edge technology 25 years ago, a CD like this. So, no, it's true. In fact, when I was asking them for the true cost of the carbon tax, they had all these blackouts. And one of the blackouts was that if they told us the full cost of the carbon tax, that it would jeopardize national security. So I don't know how it's possible that if a little old lady finds out how much she's paying extra for cucumbers as a result of the higher transportation tax to bring them to her grocery store, that's going to imperil the security of our borders. But it just shows the insanity of the excuses that they will use to justify blacking out information to which Canadian taxpayers and citizens should by default be entitled. The same is true with this We scandal. They brag about it. They released 5,000 pages, but they don't mention that they blacked out hundreds of pages of information in that disclosure. So you're absolutely right. It has become about how can they keep things secret and covered up rather than how they can make them public. And that is exactly the opposite of what our friend Mr. Trudeau promised when he was running for Prime Minister.
It's absolutely the opposite.
Yeah.
So, Pierre, my question is kind of just an average Joe that doesn't really understand enough about the political world in Ottawa. Isn't this independent of the government? I mean, isn't there an entity within the Government of Canada that makes the decision, and they're the ones that decide what to black out, or is it heavily influenced by the governing party at the time?
So the way it works is that there's someone called the Access to Information Commissioner.
Okay.
And when you file your Access to Information request, that commissioner has a delegate in the department to which you made the request, and they say, please go and get this. But the officials from that department will hand over redacted documents. They will exclude certain things. And then you will get this disc, and it is up to you then to go to the commissioner and say, I object. I'm fighting back. I want to appeal. And at that point, the commissioner then goes to the department and says, okay, let's sit down and look over all your redactions, and I will render a ruling.
Right.
The problem is that this process is extremely long, and there are countless tricks that the departments can use to grind you down. You have a day job. You're managing billions of dollars of other people's money. Mm-hmm. Think about people, the farmer in rural Saskatchewan who wants something. He doesn't have time to fight and wrangle with bureaucrats. He can't hire a lawyer. they could come back to him with 10,000 pages of irrelevant documents unrelated to his questions, and then the redaction, the one thing he's looking for is covered in black ink. Well, he's got to go through 10,000 pages and then find out where it's hidden and decide how he's going to file his appeal. Meanwhile, there's 10 or 11 bureaucrats in the agriculture department who are working against him. Well, he hasn't got a chance.
No, not
There's
at all.
just no way that he can get off the combine or out of the barn and sit at his desk and wrangle around with these bureaucrats in Ottawa. And that's what they do. They grind people down until you just get exhausted, you throw up your hands, and it ends up staying a secret. So it takes a tremendous amount of persistence, and I'm very glad that someone like you, who's not paid to do this, you do this as a patriotic citizen, is determined to keep fighting until you get what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And so my question then would be, it sounds to me it's more like a cultural issue that needs to get shifted.
Yes.
I mean, if all of a sudden the Conservative Party was the governing party in Canada tomorrow, it doesn't seem to me like this would shift immediately.
Well, it does take time. When I was the parliamentary secretary in Stephen Harper's government that passed the Accountability Act, it was my job to get that through.
Okay.
And we had some sweeping proposals to expand access to information, almost all of which have passed. But there was great resistance at the bureaucratic level from the very start. And access to information was there were two things they objected to. One, we wanted to give prize money to whistleblowers who exposed corruption. We wanted to actually give them a cash prize if they came forward. And the bureaucrats hated that. We ended up backing down on that for reasons I can tell you if you're interested. But then the other was they were very worried about expanding access to information too much.
And what was did they cite a reason for that worry?
Well, their viewpoint is that they can't candidly advise ministers if they know that every word they utter is going to be scrutinized and used to drive a wedge between the public servants and the ministers. So that's one objection. The others, there's all kinds of others, commercial sensitivities, national security, etc. But by and large, it's a big, powerful, monolithic beast called the federal government that is now a $600 billion beast that protects itself. And it's like an organism in nature that wants to grow and expand and protect all of its interests. And naturally, and unfortunately, for some, they believe that it involves keeping secrets from the people who should know.
So if you're in power in the next election, if your party becomes the governing party of Canada, is this something that you're going to commit to changing?
Absolutely. I think there are. That's something that Aaron O'Toole will probably put in his platform. We do need a renewed anti-corruption bill. The Accountability Act was fantastic. It's by the way, the only reason this WE scandal is coming out is because of that law. It's the law, the Conflict of Interest Act that Trudeau's been found guilty under twice, and soon a third time. That was in the Accountability Act. The lobbying registry, that was created by the Accountability Act, and
just to be clear, this is the act that you were responsible for
piloting through the House of Commons. Yeah,
under Stephen Harper.
Under Harper. So that was now 16 years ago. So I think perhaps it's time for us to,
especially when I'm getting my FI results on a CD.
Exactly.
Like we had a harder time trying to find a computer that had a CD reader on it. You know, one of the things that is my criticism is not only being able to try to read a DVD, or maybe it's a DVD, but the fact that if I run an FOI here in Canada and I get the information, it only comes to me. Unless I publish it on my personal website, no one else really knows about it. By contrast, Pierre, I don't know how it works in Ontario where you live, but here in BC, if I run an FOI, it gets published on the BC government's website.
Interesting.
For everybody to get access to.
Okay.
And to me, that seems only fair and just. You know, why should it be? It's not really freedom of information if the only freedom is the individual who access that information.
Right.
So you can find the files on the Government of Canada website, as you probably know, but you have to submit a request to get access to those files, and then they send you another CD. Maybe they bought too many of these things like 20 years ago.
They probably
did. Through the inventory.
they thought it was a steal, or maybe they knew the contractor.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, but you're right on, and I'm glad that you keep pushing. Don't give up, and file a complaint. Get the ATIP commissioner investigating them.
Okay.
Because there's nothing worse than being under investigation by an officer of Parliament, and that's what happens when you file a complaint. An investigator is obliged by law to look into your complaint and report back to you. So do it.
Okay, sounds good. I'll take you up on that one. Before we finish on this, just so the listeners of this can get a real sense of how problematic this is, I do want to play a video clip of you, Pierre.
Okay.
So if we can pull that one up, Jasmine. Maybe I don't know if you're familiar with this one. It'll be the blacked out, this one here. Do you know which clip we're about to play, Pierre?
I think I can guess.
Do you want to set this one up for us?
Well, this is the day after we received the so-called 5,000 pages of disclosures from the federal government.
Yes. In
the WE scandal. And the Parliament had asked for it, and they gave us the documents. And then an hour after we got the release, Trudeau prorogued Parliament, shut the place down so that our committees could not reconvene to ask for anything more. But the big and ugly surprise when we opened them is how much black ink was all over these documents. Yeah. And you're about to see some of it.
Yeah, here we go.
Then we have here an email from Craig Kielburger to Bill Morneau. And, we'd love to learn about the attached documents in it, but unfortunately, in what is to become a trend throughout this package, it's all the relevant information in the two documents are completely blacked out. Another email from Craig Kielburger that went to someone in the government the same day he spoke to Bill Morneau on the phone, but we don't know who received the email, that's blacked out, or what the email said, all blacked out. Here's an email from the minister responsible for the department that granted the $500 million to her top bureaucrat. Again, all the substance is blacked out. And that would not be the first time. Next page, blacked out. This page, blacked out. This page, blacked out. This page, blacked out. Why don't we ask what's in those pages at a parliamentary committee?
There you go.
Well, the answer is the committees were all shut down an hour after the documents were released.
Yeah.
So anyway, if it doesn't make you laugh, it makes you cry.
I will say it's something that it's very theatrical, by the way. It was good. You made a very, very strong point there. It becomes discouraging as a non-political person to even want to show up at the polls when you see this kind of stuff go on. I mean, some people take the opposite view. They're like, I want to get this guy out of here more than ever.
Right.
That's my view. But do you have any comments about Canadians who are discouraged by what seems like just one after another, government after government, of unaccountability? And how is it going to be different if the Conservative Party gets into power in the next election?
Well, listen, as Churchill said, parliamentary democracy is the worst system of government except for all the others. Parliament, I like to think of Parliament as a truth machine. It is, I say, people say, oh, there should be less fighting in that place. I disagree. There should be more. We should be fighting for the things we believe in. We should be fighting for the people for whom we work. And the most powerful people in the country should tremble when they walk into Parliament. That is how our system was designed.
Right.
It is deliberately adversarial. There is not, as in the United States, a half circle, but two sides. And they are 2.5 sword lengths apart so that they couldn't chop each other's heads off from their respective seats back in the old parliamentary days of the United Kingdom. And so our system is deliberately adversarial because the official opposition has the job of holding the government to account. And it is believed that in opposition, we are exercising loyalty. So opposition is loyal in our system. Mm-hmm. And that's the role I play right now as the chief finance critic. Will a future Conservative government be perfect? No, of course not. But we will put forward a plan to restore accountability to our system of government. I think if you look back in the Harper government, there were controversies and alleged scandals, but I think if you compare in the magnitude to what's going on now, it's, we had a minister who had resigned because she got caught spending $17 on a glass of orange juice.
Right.
We had a guy from out here in BC, John Duncan, who resigned because he made the mistake of calling a quasi-judicial tribunal to help a constituent he'd never met. He had no financial interest in himself, but politicians aren't supposed to call judges or magistrates, and so he resigned. You know, that was a quaint era when that kind of a thing was a scandal.
Sure. Love to go back to those days.
Like it would be nice if people were resigning for things like that. Now they're resigning for illegally taking $41,000 vacations and then turning over $500 million in grants to the group they got the vacation from. Like that's...
And there's a lot that aren't even resigning.
A lot that are not the prime minister who's done worse.
Yeah.
So anyway, look,
Okay.
I'm not saying that you vote for one party, you're going to get angels, and then the other, you're going to get demons. It's not. We're all made of the same clay.
Yeah.
But it is up to the people. Folks say to me, how are we ever going to make sure these politicians are punished? Well, go into the ballot box.
Sure.
And execute that punishment yourself. Because as Churchill also said, there's nothing more powerful than the little man behind a little curtain with a little piece of paper that he puts into a little box. And that is the power of democracy.
Mm-hmm. You'd mentioned in that comment that you are I think it's described as the critic minister for Ministry of Finance. Shadow Minister.
Yeah.
So let's jump into that last topic before we wrap this up on finances. Now, the projected deficit for 2020 is currently estimated at $343 billion. Over half of Canada's public debt has been amassed just under Justin Trudeau since 2015. And just to give you an insight here, Pierre, I actually voted for Trudeau back in 2015.
Right.
I'd never voted Liberal before, but I did vote because it was what I saw as a protest vote against what I saw under Stephen Harper as a closed and unengaged government. And I regret having made that vote ever since. And I went from being a big fan of Justin Trudeau for a few short weeks, and then seeing him go into power and seeing all the antics and the insane spending that's been going on by this government. Insane. And being someone who's in the world of finance, you know, I remember seeing your video clip, and I think we've got it here. So I want to start off with this one because I think this is a really good segue into talking about how bad our finances are. One of the big rating agencies, Fitch, has reduced our credit rating status from AAA, coveted AAA rating. It's been around for almost 2 decades to AA+. And I think it's just the beginning. So you can kind of just get a sense of where I position myself on this one. But let's start with this video. Let's do this one real quick.
Mr. Poilievre, have you been able to get a list of all the projects the government has so far funded under its infrastructure program since it took office in 2015?
We asked that question many, many times. We never were able to get a full list. And I think the issue is that there is no centralized record holding at Infrastructure Canada because the various programs are delivered by multiple departments and there doesn't seem to exist a list. We've asked, and Jason can attest to, Jason was part of these discussions, we've asked more than once and we never got a complete list of projects under the Invest in Canada plans or infrastructure programs.
And how much money have they spent on this program so far?
So far it's tens of billions, certainly.
And they don't know where it went.
If they know, they're not telling us all of the details of each dollar where it went.
Well, you don't have a list of projects that adds up to the total, right?
Go ahead.
We currently do not have a list of projects. At the behest of interested members of the House, we did follow up with Infrastructure Canada and the government in January with an updated information request, and we are in active and ongoing negotiations with Infrastructure Canada and multiple departments and agencies to try to compile a list.
Compile a list.
I would say that it has taken potentially a little bit longer than we anticipated.
So if I go to the grocery store and spend a small fortune on groceries, my wife says, what the hell did you spend $500 on? She'd expect to see a receipt with item by item on it, wouldn't you, honey? She's back there. But you're telling me when the government of Canada spends tens of billions of dollars on infrastructure, it can't give us an item-by-item list? It doesn't have one ready?
We can't comment on his marital situation.
There you go. It's a good one. Was she actually there?
She was. She works on the Hill, so okay. She doesn't work for me. But,
Yeah.
but
So let's get your comments. What are your thoughts on where our finances are today?
Well, listen, the deficit is actually more like 380 billion now, because the 343 that you cited it's the official government estimate from July the 7th, which is the last time they published an estimate.
Okay.
But since that time, they've publicly announced another roughly $40 billion in spending. So we're now up around 380. And that does not include the fall economic update, in which they're planning to spend even more. So this is a monstrous deficit. I'll just give I don't want to overwhelm your listeners with numbers, but just to put this into historical perspective, because we're being told, and rightly so, that we're in a crisis, right? So of course we should expect a deficit in a crisis. So we've been in crises before, right? And we have, in all of Canada's history, we've had World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Great Global Recession, 08-09. In all of those crises, this is the biggest deficit as the share of GDP outside of 1943, which was right in the middle of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So our deficit is this year, right now, 17% of GDP, which is about twice what it was in the worst year of World War I. It is about 3 times what it was in the worst year of the Great Depression, 1932. And it is about 4 times bigger than the worst year in the Great Global Recession. And so, again, the only time we've ever had a deficit this big was 1943, when we were fighting Hitler and Mussolini and Imperial Japan. And at that year, it was 23% of GDP, which is 6 percentage points bigger than it is right now. But what did our grandparents do when they got home from war, when they were exhausted of watching their brothers and sisters shed the blood on the battlefield? Did they say, now is party time,
right,
we're going to put our feet up and we're going to rack up even more debt? You know what they did? They paid off the debt. And in 1947, we had the biggest single budget surplus is a share of GDP in Canadian history, 5% of GDP. That would be the equivalent of us running a $120 billion surplus in today's dollars and today's economy. Mm-hmm. So our grandparents, having just sacrificed everything for our freedom, then came back and paid off the debt. They didn't leave that to their kids and grandkids. So it'd be nice if we had a little dose of that nobility and that integrity that our grandparents had. Justin Trudeau, by contrast, doesn't think we should ever run a surplus. I mean, they're now talking about putting in place structural spending that will outdate the COVID lockdown. So, if we get out of COVID completely in a year, he sees us spending $100 billion a year more than we take into perpetuity. Where our debt to GDP is now about 50% of GDP. So in 1996, we hit the debt wall because the old finance minister, John Manley, he'll tell the story. He says, we had a cabinet briefing, and you'll appreciate this in your line of work. The bureaucrats came in and they said, we were out today with an offering. And, great, how did it go? Well, no one wanted to lend to us. Oh, really? How much did we raise? Nothing. Oh, that sounds pretty bad. So how much was it? How much did we sell? Nothing. Like literally, there's not a single person on planet Earth that will lend the government of Canada $1. Right. That was 1996. And that's why Chrétien slashed healthcare, slashed the military, raised taxes on workers. They had to cut government spending by 10% in one budget. And that was because the money ran out. Now, that was when the debt to GDP ratio was 66.6% of GDP. We're now at 50%. 6 months ago, we were at 30%. So you can imagine our buffer was 36 percentage points from where we were to the wall, the historic wall, what we can borrow. Trudeau has blown more than half of that buffer in 6 months. Like, I'm just trying to put into perspective for your
absolutely.
listeners how massive the engorgement of debt and spending is right now under the Trudeau government. This is like a Roman orgy of spending. And we can't go in the parliamentary budget office room. You just saw he's a nonpartisan former CRA bureaucrat appointed by Justin Trudeau. By the way,
That clip we just saw.
Yes, the fellow was just on the screen. He's not a hardline fiscal conservative. He's just a bureaucrat who counts the numbers. He says we've got 1 year, maybe 2 at this rate before the money runs out. And finance bureaucrats are now calling journalists off the record because they don't want to lose their jobs. And they're saying they're literally frightened. That's a quote. I am literally frightened, say top Finance Canada bureaucrats. So this is not a partisan issue anymore. Anybody who understands the numbers knows that we are heading off a cliff. We have a little bit of time. We're not there yet. But if this continues for another 18 months, 2 years at this pace, we're going to be in a crisis.
Pierre, it seems to me like the objective of this current government is to convince enough Canadians, especially the ones that don't pay the taxes or enough of the taxes, that this is the route to go. Universal basic income, all these different programs we have. We're going to, we've gone from taking the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit is now being transferred over into a much more liberal EI program. And I know personally lots of people who just have been collecting that all summer. They're not going to work because they can collect their CERB and work some cash jobs on the side. And it seems like there's a very large, I would hope there's a large silent majority out there that sees it differently and realizes that, going back to your contrast between our grandparents' generation and this generation, this party cannot continue forever.
Millennials actually should be the most concerned because they're the ones who are going to inherit this debt.
They're going to pay the bill.
They're going to pay the bill. The older people, God bless them, they will go into from this world into the next in 10 or 15, 20 years. But the millennials will be here for the next 65 years paying interest on this colossal debt. And they should be the most aggrieved. The other opportunity I think we have is that the millennial generation is very entrepreneurial, and we need to revitalize entrepreneurship in this country, show people that there is a reward to risk taking, to venturing out and inventing a new product and to creating a new service. And I think that's where conservatives have the best growth potential among our youngest voters, is to be the true party of entrepreneurship. Because I think innate in every human being is a desire to go out and do something great and productive and valuable. Work is not just a living, it is a life. And I think that underneath it all, people do want to work and contribute, and we want to be the party that sees an economy that rewards them for doing so.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. To wrap this up, there may be an election coming soon. What are your thoughts on that? Any comments?
Well, I'd like us to see. I think of the WE scandal, for example, as being like a trial, and I don't want the jury to have to present a verdict before they've seen all the evidence. And there's a lot more evidence to come of corruption in this case. So I think Trudeau wants an election now before that evidence comes out. He also wants an election before the money runs out so that he can get a majority. And then after he's locked in, crystallized his power for an additional 4 years, he can start taxing the capital gains on your home, your primary residence. He can raise income tax. He can raise countless other taxes to fund the spending that he will tell us during the election campaign is completely free. So that fantasy will come to an end. He wants it to come to an end after people have voted, rather than before. And that's why I believe those are the two reasons to avoid the truth coming out in the WE scam, and to hide from people the true cost of his economic mismanagement. He wants an election now. I think that we should continue to hold the government accountable, and when the time is right, then there should be an election for Canadians to render a verdict with full knowledge.
If people want to get involved with the Conservative Party or with yourself in your campaign, you're on social media, you're big on Twitter, you got a big following. Where do they go? How do they help? How do they get involved?
Withpierre.ca is my website, and hit me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all those other outlets. Whatever works for your listeners. Feel free to reach out to me, and I do answer my mail even for folks who are not in my riding. So happy to hear from you.
Okay, great. And I do want to say thank you to Taco Van Popta, MP for Langley Aldergrove, for putting this together. Pierre, really happy to have you here today.
Delighted.
Thank you for taking time to come over and see us.
Thank
here
you.
in the West Coast. And
Glad to be back.
Yeah.
Great place, beautiful place. Spent a lot of time here when I was a kid. As you know, Albertans love to vacation in BC.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time here when I was a kid, and it's a delight to be back.
Yeah, great. Well, Pierre, thanks for being on the show today. Best of luck with everything, and then we'll be chatting again soon, I'm sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
great to be with you. Okay. Thanks.
Bye.